Comrades, let us confront the stark and undeniable truth. Every brick laid, every field sown, every machine operated, every thought turned into action in the workshop, factory or office produces worlds. The worlds we live in, our cities, our societies, our very lives are the creations of our labour. Yet who decides the worth of these worlds? Who determines what your sweat, your skill, your intelligence, your very time on this earth is worth? Not you. Not those who wield their hands and minds in creation. No, it is the few, the owners of property, the masters of capital, the inheritors of privilege, who sit in their gilded offices and dictate your value as if it were a matter of their divine judgment. This is the heart of the capitalist deception. You are made to believe that your labor is merely a commodity, to be bought and sold, to be measured not by the worlds it builds, but by the profits it generates for another. Your work, the essence of your being, is enslaved to the logic of capital. You toil, you sacrifice, you create, and yet the fruits of your labor are stolen, repackaged, and redistributed to enrich those who contribute nothing but ownership. This is the structural theft of human life itself. Consider the factory, the office, the workshop. Every motion, every exertion, every thought invested in production is a seed of possibility, a spark of civilization. Yet you are told, this is its price, this is your reward. And what reward is this? When it falls short of justice, when it feeds hunger in one hand and gluttony in the other, when it produces wealth for the few and misery for the many. Do you not see, comrades, that this is not fate, not accident, but design? The capitalist system is a machine of organized injustice, a structure built to ensure that those who create remain dependent, while those who own decide the lives of all. But let us not despair, for within this oppression lies the source of revolutionary power. The very labor that capitalism exploits is the labor that can overturn it. The proletariat, the working class, is not merely a victim of history, it is the agent of its transformation. Your work creates worlds, and if you can claim the value of your own creation, you can remake society itself. But this will not happen through hope or petition. It will happen through understanding, solidarity, and action. The consciousness of your oppression is the first weapon of liberation. Recognize that the alienation you feel, the sense that your work belongs to someone else, that your hours belong to another, that your very life is rented out, is not natural, it is imposed. And if it is imposed, it can be abolished. Do not allow the masters of capital to dictate the meaning of your labor. Do not allow them to decide the worth of the worlds you build. Unite, comrades, for in unity lies strength. Organize in your factories, in your offices, in your streets. Educate one another about the nature of exploitation. Discuss not only your immediate grievances, but the systemic forces that perpetuate them. The fight is not against isolated injustices, but against a system that turns human life into a commodity, that converts creativity into profit for a few while leaving the many in want. And when you are united, when your collective power is recognized and mobilized, demand what is rightfully yours, control over the fruits of your labor, fair and equitable distribution, the power to decide not only the value of your work, but the shape of the society that your work creates. The history of every society hitherto is the history of class struggle, and today as yesterday the struggle continues. The question is no longer whether you will endure in silence, but whether you will claim your rightful power. Comrades, remember, your labor is not mere toil, it is creation. Your hands shape the cities, your minds shape knowledge, your effort shapes civilization. If the world exists, it exists because you made it. If injustice prevails, it is because the few have stolen the fruits of your creation. But this theft can be stopped. This system can be overturned. The world you build can belong to you and to all who labor. Rise, organize, and claim the value of your labor, for in your unity lies the seed of a new society, a society where work no longer creates profit for the few but freedom and dignity for all. Every act of labor is more than mere motion. It is the materialization of human creativity, intelligence, and effort. Each strike of the hammer, each turn of the wheel, each line written, each idea implemented contributes to the construction of the world we inhabit. It is through work that we transform nature, that we give form to ideas, that we produce the material and cultural foundations of society. The world is not a pre-given entity waiting for us to inhabit it. It is the result of human labor, of human beings shaping, bending, and remaking reality through their activity. Yet under the system we endure, the very process that creates society, the labor of the many, is systematically stripped of its value by the few. The capitalist imposes a hierarchy of worth that is alien to the act itself. While you labor to produce food, clothing, shelter, machines, knowledge and culture, your work is reduced to a numerical wage, a price tag, determined by profit rather than necessity, by exploitation rather than justice. This theft is not subtle, it is structural. Capitalism does not merely undervalue your labor occasionally or arbitrarily. It is designed to extract maximum effort while returning minimum reward. The machinery of profit demands that your work, the worlds you construct, exist first and foremost to enrich those who contribute nothing to their creation. You build houses, and the landlord owns them. You plant and harvest, and the industrialist sells what you produce at a markup unimaginable to you. You code programs, design products, create innovations, and yet the surplus value, the difference between what you produce and what you are paid, flows inexorably into the hands of capital. Your labor generates worlds, and yet the ownership of those worlds is withheld, reserved for the few, while the many remain dependent, alienated, and disenfranchised. The alienation of labor is not incidental. It is the very condition of capitalism. The more you produce, the less your work belongs to you. The more you create, the more you are estranged from what you have created. The hammer you wield, the machine you operate, the code you write, the words you craft, all become instruments in the service of another's wealth, tools for the accumulation of capital, rather than expressions of your own human potential. In this sense, labor under capitalism is not a fulfillment of life, but a negation of it. Your creativity is appropriated, your skill commodified, your effort abstracted into profit. The work that shapes the world is simultaneously the work that enslaves you to its logic, that traps you in a system where your existence is measured not by the worlds you create, but by the numerical value assigned to you by those who own what you have produced. Yet the power of labor is inherent and undeniable. Every act of work contains the potential to assert agency, to demonstrate that society itself is contingent upon the collective effort of the many. Without the workers, without the laborers, the entire edifice of wealth and privilege would collapse. Factories would cease to produce, fields would lie barren, cities would grind to a halt, and commerce would dissolve into emptiness. The capitalist's wealth is not the product of their ingenuity or virtue. It is the product of your labor, appropriated and concentrated. And it is this realization that contains revolutionary force, the recognition that if labor creates worlds, then labor, united, can decide the fate and structure of those worlds. The value that is stolen can be reclaimed. The alienation that is imposed can be overturned. The worlds you build can belong to you and to all who labor, rather than to the few who dictate their worth. The question that arises, then, is not whether labor has value, its value is manifest, palpable, undeniable, but whether that value will be determined by those who create it or by those who appropriate it. The system of wage slavery is a system of misvaluation, a moral and economic inversion that places the power to assign worth in the hands of those who contribute nothing of substance, while those who build, sustain, and enrich society are left to struggle for scraps. This is the fundamental injustice of capitalism. It treats the act of creation, the very basis of civilization, as a commodity to be bought cheaply and sold dearly, a spectacle in which the creators themselves are spectators rather than beneficiaries. Labor, then, is both the instrument of oppression and the instrument of liberation. It is the force through which the world is built and the power through which the world can be restructured. Every act of work is an assertion of human potential, and every worker, by recognizing their role in creation, gains the awareness of their indispensability. The worlds we inhabit, the cities, the fields, the institutions, the very networks of knowledge and culture, exist because of the collective effort of the many. And if they exist because of our labour, then it is within our power, through organisation, solidarity and conscious struggle, to reclaim the value of what we have built and to restructure society so that labour serves life, humanity and justice rather than profit alone. Under capitalism, the entire structure of society is arranged not for the flourishing of human life but for the enrichment of a minority. The few, those who own the means of production, dictate the worth of labour, deciding how much the worker may receive while appropriating the surplus for themselves. The wages given to the labourer are never a reflection of the actual value of the work performed, never a measure of the creativity, skill, or effort expended, but are calculated to extract the maximum profit for the owner while leaving the worker just enough to continue labouring. This is not an occasional injustice or a matter of individual greed. It is systemic. It is the design of a system built on exploitation, a system in which the majority produces wealth and the minority consumes it. The worker, though the source of all material and cultural wealth, is treated as a mere instrument, a resource to be expended, measured and priced according to the needs of capital. The extraction of surplus value is the central mechanism of this exploitation. Every hour the worker labours beyond what is necessary to reproduce the value of their own subsistence is a theft, a transfer of wealth from the many to the few. The products of labour, the goods, the services, the ideas, the innovations do not return to the hands of those who created them, but are funneled into the accumulation of private wealth. The factory, the farm, the office, the laboratory, all these sites are arenas in which labour is alienated from its product, and yet it is through labour alone that value is generated. The capitalist does not create value in the same sense. They create control. They create systems of ownership and enforcement that allow them to claim as their own the results of others' effort. The value of labour is therefore not intrinsic. It is imposed, arbitrated, and manipulated by those who wield the power of property and law. This imbalance is reinforced through ideology, culture, and law. The worker is taught to accept wages as fair, to believe that profit belongs to the owner because of skill, foresight, or supposed merit, while the reality is stark. Wealth under capitalism exists because labour has been forced to produce it for another's benefit. Education, religion, and media all reinforce the notion that the system is natural, inevitable, and just, masking the profound theft at its core. The illusion is maintained that the worker is compensated according to worth, that the hierarchy of pay reflects talent or contribution, when in truth it reflects power, ownership, and the ability to coerce labour into producing more than it receives in return. The exploitation is invisible to many because it is normalized, rendered ordinary, and embedded in the very routines of life. The consequences of this exploitation are vast and enduring. Workers live under constant pressure to labour more, to produce more, while receiving less than the value they generate. The few accumulate immense wealth, power, and influence, often inherited and unearned, while the many struggle to meet basic needs, deprived of the wealth they themselves have created. Poverty, inequality, and dependence are not accidents of nature, but results of this system of organized expropriation. The worker's potential, creativity, and time are systematically harnessed for the benefit of capital, and yet the worker remains dispossessed, alienated from both the fruits of labour and the decisions that shape the society in which they live. Yet within this exploitation lies the source of potential power. The worker is indispensable. Without labour, the capitalist has no wealth, no profits, no products to sell. This dependence is the key to liberation. If the exploited recognize that the wealth of the few is generated entirely by their labour, then they can assert the truth that the system is not fixed, inevitable, or beyond change. The appropriation of value can be resisted, challenged, and ultimately overturned. Through collective organization, through consciousness of class and power, workers can demand the control over their labour and the value it produces, refusing to allow it to be siphoned away into private coffers. The exploitation that once bound them can be reversed, and the wealth they create can be returned to them, and used to build a society that prioritizes life, dignity and justice over accumulation and hierarchy. Exploitation, therefore, is both the burden and the leverage of labor. It is the mechanism through which the few dominate and profit, and it is the evidence of the worker as indispensable role in society. By understanding the logic of extraction, the structures of ownership, and the ways in which labor is devalued, workers gain the insight needed to organize, resist, and reclaim what is rightfully theirs. The value of labor is not a question of generosity or goodwill. It is a question of power, and power belongs to those who produce the wealth, not those who merely claim it. Under the capitalist system, labor is not merely work. It is the instrument of control. The worker, though producing the wealth that sustains society, is systematically separated from the fruits of their labor, alienated from the product, from the process, from their own potential, and even from one another. This alienation is no accident. It is the deliberate condition upon which capitalism thrives. By ensuring that the worker cannot claim ownership over what they produce, the system maintains dependence, subjugation, and the illusion that survival must be purchased rather than claimed. The worker labors tirelessly, shaping the world through their effort, yet the result of this effort, whether it be material goods, technological innovation, or knowledge, is denied to them. It belongs instead to the capitalist, who reaps the benefits, accumulates wealth, and enforces hierarchies of power, while leaving the worker with only the means to continue producing. The alienation manifests in multiple forms. First, there is alienation from the product. The worker does not control what is created, nor does the product serve the worker as own needs in a meaningful way. A garment produced in a factory, a machine assembled on a production line, or a report completed in an office does not enrich the worker beyond the meagre wage they are paid. The product, though, born of their hands and minds, becomes a commodity to be sold for profit. The worker, as labor is externalized, turned into an object that exists outside themselves, and in this separation lies both the injustice and the powerlessness that define the exploited condition. Second, there is alienation from the labor process itself. Work is no longer a self-directed activity that fulfills human creativity or satisfies the intellect. It becomes a means to an end, a set of imposed tasks carried out under the oversight of another, a sequence of motions dictated by efficiency, profit, or discipline. The worker, as time, energy, and attention are appropriated, their activity transformed into a mechanism for the enrichment of the capitalist rather than a reflection of their own human potential. The worker is compelled to act not as a free, creative agent, but as a cog in a machine, substituting obedience for autonomy, output for meaning, and repetition for fulfillment. The act of labor, which should be the expression of life, becomes a tool of subjugation. Third, workers are alienated from themselves. As they are separated from the product and the process of their labor, they are also estranged from their own creativity and their capacity to shape their lives. Human beings are naturally productive, naturally inventive, naturally capable of transforming the world and themselves through work. Yet capitalism turns these capacities into instruments of someone else's profit, and in doing so, it erodes self-realization. The worker, as identity becomes tied not to their achievements or contributions, but to their wage, their obedience, and their role within a hierarchy they did not choose. The alienation is psychological as well as material. It produces feelings of powerlessness, inadequacy, and estrangement that reinforce dependence and acceptance of the system. Finally, alienation isolates workers from one another. Competition, hierarchy, and individual wage dependence create division among those who share the same condition. Workers are pitted against one another, measured in terms of productivity, evaluated by quotas, and often blamed for their own impoverishment. Solidarity is weakened, collective consciousness obscured, and the very force that could challenge exploitation is diffused. By separating workers from the products of their labor, from the processes that shape it, from their own potential, and from each other, Capitalism ensures that dependence is maintained, rebellion is delayed, and the accumulation of wealth remains concentrated in the hands of the few. Yet within alienation lies a paradoxical power. If the worker recognizes the mechanisms through which they are estranged, they gain the understanding that the system is neither natural nor necessary. Labor itself, once reclaimed, can be the instrument of liberation. The same work that alienates under capitalism can, when united with consciousness and collective action, become the foundation for emancipation. By refusing to accept the division between creator and product, by asserting control over the conditions, processes, and outcomes of labor, workers can dismantle the structures of dependence and redefine the value of their activity. Alienation is not an immutable state. It is imposed, and what is imposed can be abolished through solidarity, awareness, and organized struggle. The separation of workers from their labor is the engine of capitalist domination. It enforces dependence, obscures the truth of exploitation, and ensures the accumulation of wealth by the few at the expense of the many. But it also illuminates the power inherent in labor, the indispensable role of workers in society, and the potential for collective reclamation. To understand alienation is to understand both the injustice of the present and the path to liberation, for the fruits of labor belong not to those who appropriate them, but to those who create them, and in reclaiming them, workers reclaim both their dignity and their power. The power of the worker does not lie in isolated effort, in individual complaint, or in solitary endurance. It lies in unity, in the conscious recognition that oppression is not the burden of one but the condition of the many, and that liberation is not achieved through personal survival but through collective struggle. Capitalism thrives on division, on the atomization of workers, on the illusion that each laborer must fend for themselves against the machinery of exploitation. It is in this division that the ruling class secures its dominance, for a single worker, no matter how talented or diligent, can be replaced, marginalized, or ignored. But when laborers unite, when they recognize themselves not as isolated individuals but as a class with shared interests, shared grievances, and shared power, they become an unstoppable force capable of shaping the world that they create. Class consciousness is the spark that ignites unity. To be conscious of one. S-class is to see beyond the immediate demands of survival and to recognize the structural forces that produce inequality, alienation, and dependence. It is the awareness that exploitation is not a series of accidents or the result of personal failure, but a system maintained by laws, institutions, and property relations designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. Without this consciousness, workers remain trapped in competition with one another, accepting the scraps allocated to them, while the wealth they generate is concentrated elsewhere. With consciousness, however, the worker begins to see that their strength lies not in endurance but in solidarity, not in obedience but in organization, not in individual survival but in collective liberation. Collective organization transforms consciousness into action. Workers who recognize their shared condition can deliberate, plan, and act together to challenge exploitation. They can negotiate, resist, and ultimately overthrow the systems that deny them the full value of their labor. This organization takes many forms: unions, councils, cooperatives, assemblies, political movements, all vehicles through which the laboring class can assert control over their conditions, defend their rights, and redistribute the wealth they produce. Organization turns the abstract knowledge of oppression into practical instruments of power. Without it, awareness remains impotent, and frustration is dissipated in despair. With it, even the most entrenched systems of domination can be confronted, challenged, and dismantled. The historical record confirms this truth. Throughout history, when workers and the oppressed have recognized themselves as a class, when they have acted in concert, they have forced concessions, won rights, and, in some cases, transformed societies entirely. Revolutions, strikes, and mass movements are never the work of isolated individuals. They are the manifestation of collective will, of coordinated action, of shared recognition that the power to shape society resides in those who produce it. The bourgeoisie fears this unity because they understand its potential. They know that divided workers can be controlled, exploited and pitted against each other, but united workers can challenge the very foundations of wealth and property, reclaim what has been taken, and redefine the structure of society itself. Unity is also a moral and intellectual weapon. When workers recognize themselves as part of a class, they develop empathy, solidarity, and responsibility toward one another. They see that injustice experienced by one is injustice suffered by all, and that the liberation of each is bound to the liberation of the whole. This awareness dissolves the false narratives of competition and scarcity that the ruling class promotes, revealing the truth that abundance exists but is hoarded, that progress is possible but is blocked by inequality, and that the value created collectively can be distributed equitably if the labourers themselves seize control. The power of unity is therefore both practical and ethical, combining the capacity to act with the vision of justice, creating a force that is irresistible when mobilized. But unity requires vigilance, effort, and consciousness. It is not enough to gather in numbers. Workers must recognize the principles that bind them: shared labor, shared exploitation, and shared potential. They must educate themselves and one another about the mechanisms of oppression, about the way labor is valued, alienated, and appropriated, and about the historical precedents of collective struggle. They must commit to solidarity in the face of intimidation, manipulation, and division. Only then does the unity of labor become a true revolutionary power, capable of challenging exploitation, reclaiming the value of work, and transforming society from one of inequality to one of justice, from one of alienation to one of collective empowerment. Unity is not simply a tactic, it is the very essence of liberation. To act together with consciousness is to assert that the wealth produced by labor belongs not to the few but to the many, that society is shaped by those who labor, and that freedom is achieved not in isolation but in solidarity. The collective organization of workers, rooted in class consciousness, is the lever by which the world can be lifted from the hands of the exploiters, and by which the value, dignity, and power of labor can finally be restored. The final step in the liberation of labor is the reclaiming of what has always been ours, the control over our own work, the authority to determine its value, and the power to shape the society that it sustains. For too long, workers have labored under a system that strips them of agency, reduces their efforts to numbers on a ledger, and converts their creativity into profit for the few. To claim one's rights is to recognize that labor is not merely a commodity to be bought and sold, but the very source of wealth, civilization, and life itself. It is to assert that the worlds we create through our efforts are not the property of others, but belong to those who produce them, and that the conditions under which we labor are ours to determine. To reclaim control over labor is to confront the structures of exploitation directly. Ownership, property, wages, and profit are not natural. They are social constructs designed to concentrate wealth and power. The capitalist does not earn what they take from the worker. They appropriate it by virtue of ownership, legal frameworks, and coercion. The worker, by accepting these arrangements as immutable, participates in their own subjugation. But when workers organize, when they assert that the value created by their labor is theirs, they begin to dismantle the legitimacy of this system. Rights are not granted, they are claimed through knowledge, solidarity, and action. Every strike, every union, every assembly demanding fair conditions is a manifestation of this reclamation, a tangible refusal to allow others to dictate the worth of labor. The act of claiming one's rights also requires the assertion of economic justice. Labor produces more than the worker consumes. It produces surplus value, and yet that surplus has been consistently expropriated. To reclaim control is to ensure that the wealth created collectively is distributed collectively, that those who labor are not left at the margins, while a minority accumulates luxury and power. This means challenging wages that are insufficient, conditions that are unsafe, and systems that exploit necessity. It means instituting mechanisms through which workers participate in decisions about production, distribution, and ownership, so that labour becomes a source of empowerment rather than subjugation. Reclaiming rights is not merely a demand for survival. It is a demand for justice, dignity, and the recognition that human effort is the foundation of all wealth. The struggle to reclaim labour is inherently political. The state, the courts, and the laws are often instruments of the capitalist class, protecting property and enforcing hierarchies of wealth. Workers cannot rely on goodwill or abstract notions of fairness. They must assert power collectively through organised movements, political engagement, and solidarity across industries, regions and borders. The labourer who claims their rights does so not only for themselves but for the collective, recognising that exploitation is systemic and that liberation is possible only through the power of the many. Rights, when claimed collectively, transform from abstract ideas into instruments of social change, reshaping society so that labour is valued, controlled and directed by those who perform it. Reclaiming labour is also a moral imperative. Humanity is defined by its capacity to create, to shape the world and to act with purpose. When labour is stolen, undervalued or appropriated, human potential is denied. To reclaim it is to restore dignity, to affirm that human beings are not instruments for another's enrichment, but agents capable of deciding the value and purpose of their own work. This is the essence of emancipation. When the worker claims control over labour, they claim control over life itself, over the capacity to build society according to human need rather than profit, and over the power to ensure that wealth serves life rather than hierarchy. Finally, claiming rights is inseparable from transformation. Labour under capitalism does not simply produce commodities, it produces society, institutions and relationships. To reclaim control over labour is to claim control over the society that labour creates. Workers, by asserting their authority, can determine what is produced, how it is distributed, and for whose benefit it exists. The alienation imposed by capitalism can be abolished, the exploitation that sustains wealth inequality can be ended, and the value of human labour can be restored to those who produce it. This is not theoretical, it is a practical path toward a society in which work serves life, liberty and justice, rather than accumulation, hierarchy and oppression. In this struggle, there can be no compromise with systems that enforce inequality. Rights are not a gift, and justice is not incidental. They are achieved through consciousness, organization, and the unwavering assertion that the labourer must decide the value of their labour. To claim rights is to recognize that labour is power, that work creates worlds, and that those who produce wealth possess the authority to determine how it is measured, distributed and used. The emancipation of labour is the emancipation of society, and the reclamation of rights is the decisive act through which workers take their place as the architects of their own future. Comrades, the truths we have laid bare today are undeniable. Labour creates worlds, yet under capitalism it is stolen. Exploitation concentrates wealth in the hands of the few, while the many are denied justice. Alienation separates us from the fruits of our own creation to enforce dependence. Unity and consciousness are the levers through which power can be reclaimed, and only by asserting our rights can we transform the society that our labour sustains. We have seen that the wealth, the cities, the technologies, the knowledge, and the culture that surround us are the product of our hands, our minds, and our collective effort. It is not the inheritance of the few, nor the reward of those who merely claim ownership. It is the creation of the many, and the many must claim it. The path forward is clear. Awareness alone is insufficient, and endurance under oppression is complicity. The worker must unite, must recognize the shared power in collective labor, must organize with purpose, and must demand that the value of their work belong to them and to all who labor. Solidarity is not an abstract ideal, it is the only instrument capable of confronting the machinery of exploitation and of dismantling the structures that deny justice. Every act of organization, Every assertion of rights, every refusal to accept imposed value is a strike against alienation and oppression, a step toward a society in which labour serves life rather than profit, dignity rather than hierarchy, and freedom rather than domination. Comrades, the worlds we build are ours. The system that has long claimed our effort for its own ends can be overturned. The value stolen from us can be reclaimed. The alienation imposed upon us can be abolished. The unity we forge in struggle is the force that will lift us from subjugation, and the rights we assert are the foundation of the society we are destined to create. Let this be the moment in which labour ceases to be a tool of oppression and becomes the instrument of liberation, in which the many recognize themselves as the true architects of wealth and society, and in which the promise of justice, equality, and human dignity is no longer deferred but realized in the world we create together.